All right, good morning. We're going to get started with our presentation here today. So I have first and foremost, I'll say who I am. My name is Darius Lane. I am the Public Relations Manager at John Deere, also an ACN board member. And I have the privilege of being able to announce our host for this particular workshop. And it was my pleasure to say we have here Ben West. And I'm going to go through his bio because I found it quite impressive. I'm sure you guys will. He is a seasoned strategist, communicator, and conservation leader with more than 2 decades of experience at the intersection of agriculture, sustainability, and public engagement. He is the founder and CEO of Resora Consulting, a firm that helps organizations communicate with greater clarity, purpose, and impact. Ben's career has spanned leadership roles with higher education, nonprofit organizations, and national partnerships. So I'll go back to saying that he focuses on national partnerships, always with a focus on translating complex ideas into language that resonates. He's known for his engaging workshops, one of which you'll hear here today, practical insights, and Ben teaches professionals on how to write clean, concise communication that can build trust, shape behavior, and drive meaningful decisions. An additional note that I'll add is the one thing that all of us have here as a responsibility is to be stewards of the industry that we're in for agriculture and be able to communicate the purpose and the value of agriculture. And I think what Ben's workshop here today will help us do is give you some practical tips on how to just do that, or to do just that, excuse me. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you all to Ben West with Resora Consulting.
Wow, that was exciting. I thought I was going to get out of having to actually speak. I could just sit in the back of the room and listen to the one next door. Hey, it is really good to be here. Julie just walked in. Julie, thank you for inviting me. It is pretty remarkable that I'm here, and I was a little nervous to be here because I know all of you, many of you write for a living, and I'm not a professional writer at all. I don't have a degree in English. I've never had any real writing training. I'll tell you how I got here in a minute. I was also a little worried. I've never been to this conference before, and I was worried I might be underdressed. And I'm so glad to see many of you are casual. And I was particularly worried because I've actually been in Northwest Arkansas for about 5 days. I had a speaking engagement actually just down the road on Thursday at another conference. It just so happened that these 2 conferences were back to back. So I spent the weekend here. But had a speaking engagement at 8 a.m. on Thursday last week. I was packing up at home. I live in Jackson, Tennessee, about 6.5 hours from here. To drive here, was going to try and get here by 9 o'clock or so to have drinks with a colleague. I was really rushing, packing. I had a lot of stuff on my mind, so I'm throwing stuff in my car. My car's already a disaster in the summer. I spend a lot of time in the summer paddling, and so it's usually got life jackets and paddles and any menagerie of outdoor equipment. So I'm throwing stuff in, get in the car. I was already going to be kind of rushed to get here in time. I roll into Rogers about 8:30 on Wednesday. Speaking engagement the next morning at 8 a.m. I started unpacking my stuff to get checked into my hotel room, and I found all kinds of stuff. What I didn't find was my bag. Yeah, exactly, because I left it at home in my bedroom in Jackson, Tennessee. So I have on at that moment a pair of ratty river shorts, a T-shirt with a couple of holes in it, and a pair of flip-flops I've had for about 20 years. That's what I was dressed in. So I quickly look on Google Maps. There was one place left to buy clothing, Kohl's. They were open till 9 o'clock. It was 8:30. Kohl's is 15 minutes away. I jump in my car. I drive to Kohl's. Literally as I walk in, they're saying, "Shoppers, you have 15 minutes left." So I start looking for clothes. I'm kind of hard to buy for them. I have a hard time finding pants long enough. So I start looking around, can't find any. Finally, I look over at a clearance rack, and I saw one pair of pants that were longer than the others. So I went and picked them up, and sure enough, they were my size. So at this point, I have 5 minutes left. I'd found a shirt and some socks, and I run over to try these on. They had closed the fitting room. And so I'm huddled in the back of the store as they're saying you have to come to the counter trying these pants on. Luckily, I was able to put together some kind of outfit. And the great news is these pants have been on clearance for like 3 years, evidently, because I bought them for $7.47. True story. I am happy to be here. The fact that all of you are here, it's a pretty full room, tells me either to listen to a writing talk for 45 minutes. It tells me that either you all are the biggest nerds that come to this conference, or you thought Sean was speaking first and I was speaking second. But I'm very appreciative that you're interested in writing, because it is so important. And how did I come to speak about writing? Because I'm not a professional writer. I don't have a degree in English or journalism. Worse than that, I'm a wildlife biologist. Most people went into my field because they don't like other people very much, and they like the idea of spending time outdoors with nature their whole career. I was lucky early in my career to be introduced to some mentors who showed me that in my profession, and in fact in your profession, in most professions, people are both the biggest obstacle and the biggest pathway to getting things done. And to get anything done, we have to be able to communicate with people. And that really hit home early in my career. Early in my career, I was an extension specialist at Mississippi State. A professor, had been going to school longer than my parents thought a person could go to school. I went to school for a long time. First faculty job, extension specialist. I wanted to work with real people, not just students on campus, but I wanted to work with landowners and people interested in conservation. I got invited to go down my first professional talk as a faculty member, as an extension specialist, down to this big Hunter's Night Out event in southern Mississippi. Kind of in a rural community, but the extension agent that called and said, "Hey, you're the new wildlife extension specialist. Would you come down and talk to us about white-tailed deer?" I said, "Absolutely." I spent about 3 days developing a fantastic hour-long presentation about white-tailed deer, where I put everything into it that I had learned about science and wildlife ecology over my 10 years in school. I drove 3 hours down to this little community. I go in, speak in the feed barn to about 400 or 500 people. It was probably the biggest audience I'd spoken to at that point in my career. When it was over, they applauded. There was a question or two, and then they filtered out. And as I'm packing up, the extension agent, Bill Maley, comes over to me, says, "I really appreciate you coming. I know it's a long way from Starkville." I said, "Hey, no problem." I said, "Anytime. You call me anytime." He said, "Well, we'll see what happens." And I said, "Well, how was the presentation?" And at that moment, Bill gave me something, a gift that I hope you all get at some points in your life, and that is he gave me unvarnished candor. And he looked at me, he said, "It's about the worst presentation I've ever seen." I laughed too. I said, "It couldn't have been that bad." And he looked at me, he said, "Oh, it was that bad?" He said, "It was terrible." He's like, everybody, he said, "The people down here are polite, so they didn't leave, but you lost them in 5 minutes." Most of these people don't have any background in what you do. They just wanted 2 or 3 tips to how to better manage their land for wildlife. You gave them a dissertation. They were checked out in 5 minutes. Well, I left, and you can probably imagine how I felt. I was pissed off on the drive home, and I was for a couple of days, but then sinking in that I had spent 10 years learning to be a scientist, and I had written a lot. I had communicated a lot, but I had not really learned much about what good communication was. And now I was in a position, my responsibility was to translate complex information, science, to people who need that in ways that they can understand, and I wasn't prepared. So that was 20 plus years ago, and I have spent from that moment until this moment trying to be the best communicator that I can. I do a lot of speaking and teaching around presentations, around interpersonal skills, how to develop relationships. And a few years ago, a colleague of mine called and says, "Hey, I've got an idea. Let's develop a writing course together." And I said, "I would rather watch grass grow than develop a writing course. I can't think of anything more boring." He said, "Well, I think we could do something that would be really helpful to people." So we started talking about this. He was an editor for his professional association's journal in fisheries. I had been an editor. I wrote a lot. I looked at a lot of students' papers and edited those. It was the first time I had to actually start thinking about what does good writing actually look like and think about it critically. And that was the precursor to this. Now, this is usually taught over a 1 to 2 day session. So I'm going to condense this down. There's going to be some audience participation as we go through, but I want to set the stage with a simple problem. This is a great piece of news. According to a survey American Farm Bureau did just a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, almost 90% of Americans trust American farmers. That's fantastic. But in the very next question, they asked them about their trust in agriculture, and what they found was only 20% of Americans express a high degree of trust in agriculture. There's a big disconnect here, and this disconnect is causing us lots and lots of problems all around the country in many, many ways, from consumer preferences to policy to marketing. In Tennessee, and I know in some of your states, the agricultural community this year proposed a bill in the legislature to exclude pesticide companies from liability if their products are used according to the label. That was approved by the federal government. Agriculture in Tennessee thought it would be a slam dunk, but on the day of the hearing, about 300 people showed up to speak in opposition to this bill, and 8 people showed up to speak in favor of it. Agriculture in Tennessee got their brains beat in on this bill. The Ag Committee, who was the most supportive legislators in our legislature, who most of them are farmers, withdrew the bill because of how poorly we in agriculture told our story. This is one of thousands and thousands of stories that I could tell, but I've already heard it here today. Every time I get together with people in agriculture, I hear people say this: we just have to tell our story better, and we do. But we also have to not just talk about it. We actually have to do things to tell our story better. One of the reasons I appreciate being here is because this is what you all do every day, and I appreciate the work that you do. But we have to do more, and there's lots of things we can do and should be doing and are doing. One of the things that I've focused on, that I find a lot of meaning and fulfillment in my work, is to help other professionals, scientists, technicians, farmers, folks like you, better communicate what they do and why people should care about it, why it matters. Communicating what we do and why it matters to people in ways that they can understand is a big deal. But I want to hear from you just a little bit about what that means. So as I said, we're going to have a little audience participation. I know some of you have probably used Mentimeter before. If you'll pull out your smartphone and either scan that or go to menti.com. And I'm going to try it myself. Has anybody got to it? All right, perfect. Give me 1 minute. Okay, does that question pop up on your screens? Is it working for everybody? Okay, great. I'm curious, because I suspect you've all heard this phrase and maybe used it. We have to tell our story better. What does that actually mean? In just a short phrase, what does it mean in your mind to tell our story better? Clarity, transparency, and honesty. Story must resonate people, demonstrate personal relevance. Clear, credible, concise. Lots and lots of reasons. There's lots of things that we need to do better. Now, I had you do this because I'm interested in your responses, but also because I wanted to get you into Mentimeter, because as we go through, you're going to have some writing exercises to do, and you're going to do it in Mentimeter and post it, so then we can see what you and other people, how you address some of the sentences that I'm going to be showing you. In my mind, what it means to tell our story better is we've got to be able to develop messages and distribute them in whatever channel they go through, whether it's a presentation, a podcast, a blog post, a document, an article. We've got to be able to communicate ideas. Communication is essentially taking abstract ideas in people's brains, putting them into some form of physical reality, a document, a presentation, a podcast, whatever, transmitting it to other people so they can take the ideas and put it in their brain. That's what communication is. It's a psychological process. And all good communication has to do these four things. We've got to communicate in ways that people will pay attention to it. We've got to communicate in ways that people can understand it, that they can remember it, and that they can believe it. It's a tall order, and it's getting more and more difficult every day. And the reason it's getting more difficult is because all of us are now in a state of cognitive information overload. And this has happened in most all of our lifetimes. I want you to think about how the way we share information has changed just in your lifetime. I want you to imagine that you're a bee farmer. You're a beekeeper. You raise bees. And you are at a coffee shop, and a friend of yours, colleague of yours, says, "Hey, have you heard about this new disease that has emerged in bees called nosema?" You had never heard of it before, don't know much about it. Your friend didn't know much about it either, but you're both curious. Now I want you to imagine the year is 1970, not that long ago. What would you do? What would you have done in 1970? You go home after having coffee. What do you do in 1970 to learn more about this disease? Yes. Call your local extension agent. Absolutely. I worked for Extension for many years. A great group of people. So you call your local extension office in 1970, and the office manager or secretary says, "I'm sorry, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so is not in the office today. Have you give me a call back? They'll be back in about a week and a half." Right? And then they call you, and they miss you because you're not there. You don't have an answering machine. Right? So then you go by the office. So it's difficult sometimes to make a connection. Yeah. What else? Yep. Absolutely. Networking in your own personal network, right. But this is an emerging disease. Nobody knows about it. Somebody over here. Yeah. Yes, sir. Go to the library. Yes. And what would you have done? What would you actually have done in 1970 if you, first of all, where'd you grow up? Northern Illinois. How many of you grew up in a rural area? Yeah. I grew up in a rural area, too, in Tennessee. The closest good library was about a 2-hour drive. We had a little bitty library in my hometown, but they wouldn't have had any books about stuff like this. They had Dr. Seuss books, and novels. That was about it. So, and then what would you have done when you went in the library? Drive 2 hours to the closest good library. Yeah, and where would they probably point you? The card catalog. I've got a 21-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old daughter, and they, over the last year or so, have started asking me questions like, "Dad, what was it like when you were our age?" And I'm realizing I'm getting old because the answers to their questions sounds ludicrous now. They're like, what about a library? I'm like, you go to a card catalog, and they're like, "You're not being serious." I am being serious. That's how we used to do it. Go to a card catalog, and then you find one book on bee diseases. And you go to the shelf where it's supposed to be, and guess what? Could be checked out. Then you go to the librarian and you say, "Hey, I've looking for this book. Can you put me on the waiting list?" She said, "Absolutely. You're number 8 in line. It'll be available in 7 months." All this is real. What would you do today? Google it. And if you do Google it, what you'll find is that there's 1.8 million pages that mention nosema. If you spent 1 minute per page reading these, how long would it take you? 3.5 years almost. So we have, in our lifetime, gone through a transition in society from a state of information deficit where it was hard to find information about any particular thing to where there's more information coming at us at every second than we can possibly digest in a lifetime. How many emails have you gotten since we started this morning? How many text messages? How long is it going to take you to go through those? We have an incredible amount of information coming at us. What hasn't increased is the capacity of our brain to digest all of that information. So if we're going to be writing things for people that contain important ideas that they need to know, man, we really got to be careful about how do we write to help people pay attention to what we write and understand it and remember it and believe it. You all have spent most of your life learning how to write. It started when you were in kindergarten or before that, when you started recognizing letters and words, putting words together to make sentences, sentences together to make paragraphs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when Steve and I started developing this course, we're like, how do we share something with people? They've been learning how to write their whole life. How can we share something in a day or 2 days or today in 45 minutes to help you be a better writer? And what we found as we talked and really got into the literature and started reading books written by people who help other people write well, we realized, there's some real intricacies in writing that will take you a lifetime to master. That's true. You're never done. Sean, who is going to be speaking later, writes professionally. I guarantee you he says he's still learning how to be a better writer. But we also notice that there's some big problems, some big overarching common errors that people make again and again and again. And if we could just highlight these 2 or 3 big things, big mistakes that people make, then maybe we could improve the writing. We started teaching around a few rules. I'm going to talk about 3 of them today. So 3 rules that highlight a lot of problems in modern writing that I see, and that are pretty easy to fix. And if you fix them, you will instantly get better. And I suspect most of you are already pretty good at this because you do this for a living, but it's easy for all of us to fall into bad habits. So those 3 rules are: write for real people, lead with real subjects and action verbs, and don't use needless words. In other words, words that don't really add any meaning to the sentence, words that don't help people pay attention to, understand, remember, or believe. So three rules, but 1 result: writing that people can actually read and understand. Let's talk about the first one. Write for real people. What does that mean? Of course, everyone's a real person, but nobody's like you. Nobody has the expertise and the knowledge that you have. And that triggers a psychological phenomenon called the curse of knowledge. And what the curse of knowledge shows, and has been tested many times in the laboratory, is that the more someone knows about a subject, the more inherently difficult it is for them to communicate that to other people, because they use words people don't understand. They use acronyms people don't understand. They rely and they assume people know things that they don't know. I want you to imagine that this evening, wherever you are, you're out somewhere and an alien craft lands in front of you. And the aliens approach you and they say, hey, you're a representative of Earth. We're from wherever we're from. We've been studying your planet and we understand that there's a game here called baseball. What do you know about it? And you say, well, baseball's a really popular game. It was invented here in our country. And, you kind of give them a very high-level overview. And they're like, okay, well, that's interesting. And the next morning, they pick up a newspaper. And on the front page of the sports section, you're in St. Louis, is an article about a recent game. I'm going to shut up for 1 minute and let you read this. If you're an alien and you know nothing about baseball, what does this sentence mean to you? Almost nothing. There's so much jargon in here. Things like a home run. What's a home run? An eighth inning home run, a wild pitch, a fielding error, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The sports writer who wrote this is not jargon to him or her. It's second nature. And the people he was writing for, sports fans, baseball fans specifically, they know all of this. But this tendency to use jargon creates a lot of problems, and it creates problems in agriculture. Take a look at this one. Real sentence. I use a lot of real sentences that I pulled from various sources over the years. Look at all the jargon. Can you see that? The color in here is faded out a little bit. Hydrological, rhizospheric, biogeochemical cycling. Man, this person must be really smart. But nobody can understand it unless you happen to be a soil scientist, but that probably is not the audience that this person was writing for. As a matter of fact, I know it wasn't. It was an extension publication. It was written for farmers. Why can't we just say what we mean? Now, what's remarkable about this, it says the same thing in plainer English and in fewer words. Right? This is one strategy to combat information cognitive overload. Clearer and more concise writing simply by being careful with the jargon that you use. I'm waiting for the laugh line. And sometimes the words we use are not even jargon. Like jargon actually has a role within a specific field of study. If I'm speaking to another biologist and I use a jargony term, that person knows what it means, and that piece of jargon may include some really nuanced meaning that's important with a peer, but it's too much to communicate to someone who's not an expert in that area. But we don't stop there. We use really fancy words rather than really plain words, like all of these. The meaning of all these words, for the most part, are equivalent. The only difference is the big ones have a lot more letters, and it takes longer for people to read them. My favorite one is engage in dialogue, and I've used that many times in my career, right? But just think about writing now a 5-page document or a 10-page document and writing with words like this, how much length and how much more difficult it is to read sentences. So we take, paragraphs like this, sentences like this, there's so much needless complexity that's just a barrier between the core of your idea and your reader. Look at the difference. Look at how much faster it is to read and understand the second sentence as opposed to the first sentence. And they say basically the same thing. Acronyms. We love acronyms in agriculture, especially if you work for an agency, a federal or a public agency. EQIP, CNMP, NRCS, 590, it goes on and on. And when you are reading a document that's full of acronyms, it becomes almost unreadable. One little tip for you today. If you're writing a document and you use so many acronyms that you need to put a glossary at the end of the document to look up the acronyms, maybe you shouldn't use as many acronyms. And maybe we can speak in just plain language. Now, NRCS, I know what you're thinking. NRCS is an acronym, and it is. But if you understand your audience, you can make wise decisions about which acronyms people are normally, probably know. Most farmers are going to know NRCS, even if you don't define it in the beginning. Most farmers are going to know NRCS. Will they know all the others? Maybe or maybe not. The more specific the acronym, the more likely it is people won't know it. And sometimes it doesn't even save us that much time. It doesn't save us that much space. So this sentence, the University of Tennessee developed a new youth education center called Lone Oaks Farm. I led this project for UT. It was a passion project of mine, and thousands of kids visit LOF every year. I was writing a 4 or 5 page document about the story of the farm, and I realized, man, I'm using LOF a lot. It becomes really, and then, it's like the curse of knowledge. I think about that acronym all the time. But somebody was reading and they said, what is LOF again? Why not just say the farm? Right? It takes something that is abstract, an acronym, and makes it concrete. And it's not that many more characters. It's only 4 or 5 more characters, but much clearer. So, here's your first activity. All right, I want everyone to take this sentence, which is full of jargon, and I want you to rewrite it. I'm going to give you about a minute and a half to do this, and whenever you're ready, you can either do it in your little note application of your phone, or you can do it right in Mentimeter as you write it. Put your rewrite here for everyone to see. Thank you. And it should show up on your phone as well, whatever that sentence is. I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds. I know this is speed writing. Lots of good ones, and this illustrates all of these are really good alternatives, and they're all different. So when Steve and I teach this together, sometimes people say, we just don't want me to write in my own style. Of course you can write in your own style, but use some basic principles to help your style be better, to be clearer and more concise. This one right here, just as an example, really good alternative, much shorter, much clearer, much more likely for your audience to pay attention to, understand, remember, and believe. That's my rewrite. It's not the right one, it's just mine. We're going to skip this one since we had a little delay. I'm going to write one. That one was about acronyms. But you can take a quick look at the first example and my rewrite. Much more readable, just by eliminating acronyms as much as possible. So, write for real people. Think about what the people you're writing for, what words are they likely to know, what jargon are they likely to know, what principles are they likely to know, and write for them. Second, and this is a big one, this is a huge problem in writing, especially young professionals or people who got out of college or started their career and never really thought about writing again. They don't lead with concrete subjects or concrete nouns and strong verbs. And so what that unfortunately looks like is like this. It's a very common sentence I see all the time. Now, what is it? It is a sentence that does not use a concrete noun. It uses it. And it's a sentence that uses the action, takes the action, and it's an abstract adverb. Instead of this. Now, you'll notice by rewriting, I'm going to give you just a second to read this. Hopefully it says the same thing. Faster to write, and as a matter of fact, it is significantly shorter, 32% shorter. One of the great benefits of writing with concrete nouns and strong verbs is that it reduces your writing on average 20 to 40%. Sometimes less, sometimes more, but it makes your writing considerably shorter and much faster and easier to read. So what actually happens here, and how do you do this? Well, first of all, this is the biggest thing. If you get nothing else from this talk, think about this, and go home and read, think about it, how to write without using forms of to be, or at least reducing greatly your use of to be verbs. Is, was, are, were, be, being, been. All of those things, when you use those devices, and sometimes it's okay. I'm not saying never use them. Most writers that I see, at least non-professional writers, should cut down their use of these by 80%. Because by using those, you write sentences like this. There's a kicking interaction between Bill and Jim. Is, to be verb, creates this very complex sentence. But you have to ask yourself, who's doing what to whom? And once you do that, then you can make the sentence much shorter and much more direct. A sentence like this: there is a good deal of circumstantial evidence to support this scheme. What is this sentence? It is a form of the verb to be at the beginning, there is, followed by a list of prepositional statements. If you see the form of the verb to be, like is, it usually looks like this. There is a good deal of circumstantial evidence to support this scheme. It's like a laundry list. And then the whole document is like that, and you're asleep before you get halfway through it. But if you ask, who's doing what to whom? Circumstantial evidence is supporting this scheme, then you can write a sentence that's much shorter, much clearer. So then we take sentences like this. Completion of the project is estimated to require 3 years from beginning to end. In this case, the who is doing what to whom is hidden, because who's really doing it is us. This came from a research proposal, right? The research team is proposing this. Why didn't they just say, we'll complete the project in 3 years? Look at that, 8 words, 43% shorter. The goal of this program is to improve soil health. Why not just say it directly? This program, or the program, improves soil health. 5 words, 50% shorter. So avoid forms of the to be verb and avoid abstract nouns. What's an abstract noun? An abstract noun is a verb or an adverb that we change to make a noun. So we take words like implement and make it implementation. And we take manipulate and we make it manipulation. And we take efficient and we make it efficiency. So we take verbs and adverbs and we make them nouns. And that, in combination with the to be verbs, creates very wordy sentences. So abstract nouns are end usually to find them in shun and meant and ant. So implementation, development, resistance. And so then we have sentences that look like this. This sentence doesn't use any to be verbs, just abstract nouns. But just that by itself makes the sentence longer and more difficult to read. And here's one that uses both. A form of the verb to be is, our problem is, followed by a bunch of, a laundry list of things using abstract verbs. So if you think about highlighting those, one of the tricks that I use when I edit other people's stuff and my own is to, number one, look for all the verbs, the to be verbs, in this case is, and look for all of the abstract noun, which you can usually pretty quickly figure out, because they usually end in tion or ance or some of those others. By highlighting those, it helps you see where the problems with the sentence are and where you might be able to improve it, and write a sentence like this instead. Use real verbs, action verbs, and no forms of the verb to be. 19 words, 27% shorter. Next exercise, you're going to be rewriting this sentence. There are several practices that can be implemented to improve soil health, including the establishment of cover crops, implementation of no-till, and application of compost. Y'all be able to go to your Mentimeter. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do that, and then we'll see how everyone did it. Give you another 30 seconds. Some really good examples here. This one, whoever wrote, great. And many different versions of this one on the screen. But just think about how much faster it is and how much clearer this sentence is than the one that I showed earlier, which started with a verb, a to-be verb, with a bunch of abstract nouns. That's what makes sentences long and difficult to read. Again, this is not necessarily the right answer. It's just the way I rewrote it. Farmers can improve soil health by using cover crops, reducing tillage, and applying compost. 14 words, 44% shorter. Many of the ones you wrote even shorter than that. We're going to skip that activity too. To get to the very last one, which is simply omit needless words. Anybody in here read the famous Strunk and White book? And most people have. They have a whole chapter on this. Just don't use words that don't convey important meaning. If they don't actually help your audience pay attention to, understand, remember, or believe, then why put the words on there? So rather than using phrases like was responsible for, caused, in order to, like all of these phrases have the same meaning as the much shorter single word or short phrase. Why use them? It just makes things longer. How many of you have gotten an email in the last month? Have any of you gotten a single email in the last month you thought, man, I wish that email was longer? Well, how do you make it shorter without losing meaning? It's by writing more crisply and concisely. And so you can take sentences like this in comparing the proposed action to the no action alternative. It is apparent that significant blah, 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 blah. Now I'm asleep. We can just do things so much faster by eliminating needless words. When we analyze the data, we found that. Why not just we found? If they're reading an article about a project that's a research project, they're probably going to know that you use data. Okay, one more exercise on your part, then we'll wrap this up. So think about all the needless words that are in here. In order to comply with, da-da, 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 let's see how you would rewrite it. Great first examples. Look how much shorter, how much crisper these options are. Lots of different ways to rewrite the sentence. This is how I rewrote it, not the right way, just my way. 11 words, 50% shorter than the first one with essentially the same meaning. So those are the three high-level principles. They're very simple. They take a long time to master. I still, all the time, write something and go back and read it and think, well, this is crap, right? But having these in your toolbox can really help. And by the way, since people ask me all the time, well, do you use ChatGPT for writing? Yes, I do sometimes. And what I particularly use it for is to help me spot this in my own writing. So it's really common for me to write something, upload it to ChatGPT and say, please edit this with these rules. And so I've got a list of about 8 or 10 rules that I wrote. I've got it in a place I can copy and paste it into ChatGPT anytime. Edit this or give me suggestions based on these rules. If you don't do that, you don't know what ChatGPT will give you back. It's going to refer to its own writing style or some. But if you give it direction specifically, I have found it can be really, really helpful. So that's it. I really appreciate your time and attention today. I just want to close with I really appreciate the work you all are doing. It is so important in our field to tell our story better. And you all are the tip of the spear on that. We're going to have to tell our story better, and it's going to be people like you that are going to lead us into that future. So thank you. We're 2 or 3 minutes over, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them now or stay up here. If you've got a question, come up and talk to me.